Hello, this is Aarti Shaw. I am here with my fabulous co-host Bill Coletti for another episode of The Heart in Science. This is actually a special episode. This is a new series that we're launching. It's called the Icon series, and it spotlights sort of trailblazing agency owners who, defied the odds and built standout brands and in many cases sort of reshaped their own industries. The idea is to have some candid conversations where we sort of explore the grit, the vision, and kind of the resilience that it takes to turn their ideas into thriving businesses. And on our first episode of Icon, I am so delighted that we have my friend, Susan Butenhoff. Many of you may know that name. Susan launched Access Communications, and this was a power boutique. We'll talk more about that in the conversation. Throughout the 2000s, she sold it, or I guess the 90s and the 2000s. She sold in 2007 to Omnicom as one of the biggest sales right before the recession hit. And actually, it was 2008. And then she went on to stick around at Omnicom and Ketchum for another several years before becoming the consultant she is today. But she's one of my favorite people in the business, so I'm very excited. Bill, hopefully, you're excited as well to talk to Susan.
Absolutely. Susan has been someone that we've talking to for quite some time. And I just think what she did in the coining of certain phrases and her entrepreneurial journey, there's a lot to learn from Susan, and the way your friendship it's very nice to see as well.
Yes. Well, before we get to the conversation with Susan, we are going to do what I think is our, one of my favorite parts of the show, where we do our heartbeats and our science experiments. Bill, do you?
Sure.
I invite you to go first with your heartbeats.
Happy to do it. So heartbeats. So my mom passed away last year in the summer, and we had a ceremony in Austin and all the appropriate things. But our whole family recently got back from convening together in Pinellas County, Florida, St. Petersburg, Clearwater area in Florida. And it was to dedicate my mom's leadership legacy. And as she was passing in the first 6 months of 2024, she and I had an opportunity to talk about leadership, talk about her leadership, and then we instilled that into 3 pillars of leadership. And so my heartbeat is the ability for us to be able to share that with the organization that she founded. It's a drug and alcohol abuse treatment program with former elected officials, former people that had been in the industry for years. And so my heart was incredibly full that A, we got to come together as a family, but B, we got to talk about my mom's leadership. So that's pretty cool heartbeat.
Wow. And I did not know that your mom founded that organization. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds like it will
continues on bigger and better than ever. Obviously the industry's changed, but founded in the early 70s when one of my siblings was experimenting with substances, and my mom founded an organization that became Parental Awareness and Responsibility. And she needed to go find out answers, and that she felt that was the parental awareness, and then it was her responsibility to take what she learned and share it with others. And so that became Operation PAR, P-A-R.
Operation PAR. I was just going to ask the name so that
Operation PAR.
Anyone who that resonates with, that's listening, can look that up themselves.
It's a great program in Florida. Yep.
Yeah.
So clearly our heartbeat, full of it, rich, and just when family gets together, it was cool, and there was no sadness of a funeral because we had already done that. It was this dedication of a leadership legacy. So it was actually wonderful, and it's the first time I can think of, even at weddings and my dad's funeral. This is the first time we've had everybody together for the day, which is really fabulous.
Oh wow!
All the kids, grandkids, immediate cousins, and so it was really quite nice.
Oh wow! Yeah, no, there's there's something very comforting about reconnecting with all your siblings together and just watching all of those dynamics emerge again, right?
Good and bad.
Yes, good and bad. But it's a reminder. It's a reminder of where you came from, right?
Absolutely.
So one of the things I notice is that whenever I do my heartbeats, it tends to be related to like music or movies, and that is because, as maybe folks on this podcast may not know, I love pop culture, and I spend a lot of time when I'm not thinking about PR in our business, just sort of exploring that world. But I've been doing a deep dive into Bob Dylan on the back of A Complete Unknown, which is, which is the biopic that came out, I think, in December. It's entertaining, albeit, a somewhat superficial look at Bob Dylan's transformation from like this folk singer in Greenwich Village to this like music icon, right? Mm-hmm. But there were clear gaps in that story, and again, I've always just been a casual Bob Dylan fan, so I was like, all right, there's obviously pieces here that I'm missing. So to fill those gaps, I watched Martin Scorsese's No Direction Home, which is about, I don't know, it's like 3.5 hours. And it fills in those gaps. It's from that same time period, 1961 to about 1966, so a little bit farther than the movie goes. And I have to admit, I was absolutely floored. I was converted from a casual fan to whatever, something more hardcore. I don't know what that is yet. But I was bringing it back to sort of where we are today, right? In this era of AI and RTO mandates, just this reminder of how messy the creative process can be and how there's still something so human in being able to tap into some kind of collective spirit and some sort of zeitgeist, which is what Bob Dylan was incredibly gifted at and continues to be. He's, for those that don't know, he is still alive and touring with Willie Nelson this year. And as creative entrepreneurs, I think we can get really bogged down in some of these like, how many days of the week should we be in the office? And, how do we use AI? And really just some of this magic of like human creativity can get lost. And it's incredibly exhilarating and oftentimes frustrating, as I think is depicted in this documentary as well, to give that creative process some space to breathe and to exist. And it was just such a reminder of how, when we step out of our own way, how beautifully that can play out.
Mm. That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
I look forward to checking it out. It's funny, if these things come in threes, you're like the third person in the past 24 hours that said, you must watch that movie. So it's kind of neat.
And if the movie, and like I said, the movie is fairly superficial. So if that piques your interest, I would then go back and watch the Martin Scorsese documentary. Cool. And you can split it up. Like we watched it over 3 nights. We watched like an hour every night.
Yep.
There's some obvious, and that's where you really kind of feel like you get inside of Bob Dylan's head a little bit more. So okay. Yes. Yeah. So,
Cool.
All right. So let's do experiments. What do you have for us, Bill?
So it's a superficial experiment, but it's important to me. So I'm just back from a week of skiing with some dear friends, a group of guys I put together some years ago, and we're just back from skiing. And I snowboard, they ski. And so my experiment is somewhat superficial. My experiment is foot position and how, as we age, our hips, we were talking about hips dysplasia a little bit earlier, but even in humans, our feet and our legs sort of change, and how do snowboard bindings and snowboard stance angles. So if there's any bit of science that I've been spending time on recently, at least the past 3 or 4 days, it's been about stance and position on a snowboard. Not for everybody, but it's really sort of interesting as we age, how our architecture actually changes in our lower limbs in particular. So that's my science experiment: is what's the right foot stance for me.
Are you going to be spending much more time
going back one more trip? I'm taking my kids, or my boys, my son-in-law and my stepson. We're doing 3 days here in a weekend or so.
Is it?
Yeah.
Or are you going up to Colorado?
Going to Colorado, yeah. And we're driving to Albuquerque, or flying to Albuquerque and then driving up to Colorado. So yeah, kind of neat.
Yeah. I'm sure, we can talk for hours about how our bodies are changing. Yes. I'm going to stick with so if it's not pop culture that I'm kind of obsessed with, it's politics. And I think that the way that those two worlds merge is really exciting. So my experiment is actually related to political science and communication science. And maybe, hopefully maybe it'll offer some hope for our fellow Americans. But I spent some time at the LBJ Library in Austin over the holidays, and I've been now reading The American Dream by Doris Kearns Goodwin. By the way, I for anyone who's going to say, no, you have to read Robert Caro's multi-volume encyclopedia on LBJ, don't think I'm quite ready to commit to that. But if anyone listening wants to be a reading buddy and wants to do a book club on Caro's LBJ books, I'm more than happy to.
That's an annual goal. That's the goal
that would be. No, I mean it might take decades before we get through them all. But anyway, but what was, in my kind of exploration of LBJ, because apparently if I'm not exploring Bob Dylan these days, I'm exploring LBJ. I am all about the 1960s right now, if anyone hasn't figured that out. But just like a reset on how we think about leadership and how we think about persuasion. And as everybody listening here, it's easy to forget that we are at the end of the day in the business of persuasion. And I was listening to a Democratic strategist on NPR, and they were talking about how, the Democrats, more recently have they listen to public opinion polls and then they decide where they're going to stand. And I feel like as the Democratic Party, and maybe sort of as a collective, we've or maybe those of us that are center left and on that side of the spectrum, we've forgotten our role to persuade. And I think that's what LBJ was so good at. And I've been also thinking about how we persuade, right? It does involve more than simply relying on sort of the goodness of people's intentions, which I think is sort of the Obama Aaron Sorkin playbook. And LBJ played a harder ball of persuasion. And I just think that that's worth exploring again as we move into some uncharted political territories. So that's my experiment, is asking, inviting folks to think about persuasion, maybe exploring LBJ a little bit, and how he wielded his own power.
That's big. I love that stuff. That's good stuff. Very good stuff.
Yes. And the 1960s apparently is where my headspace is a lot these days. So, okay. On that note, let's talk about Susan. So, as we explore this conversation with Susan, a couple of things I would invite our listeners to sort of keep a listen out for. Think a little bit about, how she started her business and how she made some of her decisions around equity. And then how some of that was informed by her family history and her family kind of history in entrepreneurship in particular. And then we'll explore a little bit about, whether she would redo this today. And I think her answer is going to be surprising to a lot of people listening. And it's just, she reflects on some of what she gave up and some of what maybe she would do differently today.
Yeah. And I think all those are really, really very important things. For me, there's this minor point that she raises that I just really love, is this concept of a power boutique. And I've been told that, it's been out there for a while, but it's kind of new to me. But just not giving up equity, and how that she grew the firm, grew loyalty, grew culture without having to sacrifice making that choice. And then that discussion about her entrepreneurial journey and about her brother and her father. And there's some really fascinating little bits that I encourage everyone to sort of ask themselves, where did they get their spark? Where did they get their drive to become an entrepreneur? And what kind of entrepreneur do you want to be? So it was a fabulous conversation. And the richness of y'all's friendship is really quite lifting up in the conversation. So I'm glad to be a part of that as well.
Yes. And with that, let's jump into our conversation with Susan. So when I started covering the PR industry way back in, I guess it was 2007, I am pretty sure one of my first meetings was with Susan Butenhoff. And at that point, I think Susan must have been well into probably over a decade into running her own firm, Access Communications, which many of you may remember. And I remember that meeting really well because I was absolutely floored by her intelligence, her drive, and her business sense. But more than even that, I was impressed with how much fun she seemed to be having. And I am so delighted that today Susan is our guest. And Susan, I have to say that, you sold Access Communications in 2008, just before the financial crisis. You worked at Omnicom for 10 years and now you're working as a consultant. And I have to say, every time I still see you, you seem like you are still just having the time of your life.
I have to say, I pinch myself all the time that I'm so lucky. I ended up on a professional track that just really suits my character and my skill sets. And most importantly, I find super interesting because you're constantly having to refresh your levels of knowledge when you're in this industry. And you have to love a dynamic market environment, I think, to succeed. And that really works well with my professional ADHD.
I mean, I'm not kidding when I say that your happiness and joy stands out. Because as you know, I know a lot of owners in this business, right? And a lot of them could not wait to get out. Like they were building to sell, and then they they have ranches and, different parts of the country now, and they have never been seen from or heard from again after they sold their business. And Bill, I know you know some folks like that too. And, so Susan, tell us a little bit about, let's go back to how this all started. And did you know that you wanted to have your own agency? Did you know that you would find so much joy being an entrepreneur? Or was it the industry itself that you loved so much?
I think it's both. So what happened was I didn't have a grand plan to go into public relations. And in fact, I'm always just completely impressed by any employees I hired who I said, what did you do at university? And they said communications and journalism. I'm like, God, that's genius. I did international relations. I thought I was going to be Secretary of State. So I didn't have a grand plan to build a business, but I did come from a family where my father was an entrepreneur. He started a business. It went global. And even as a young child, we were always told, if you want to be in control of your destiny, both in terms of finances and happiness, you need to create your own entity. And it was just in the meal conversation at dinner. It was very casual, but it was very present. And then you mentioned something about people who are looking for the exit strategy. I didn't get into PR to make any money. I mean, I always thought the big prize was just doing something you love and you're good at. And then I'd been at Ketchum for 7 years and I thought, gosh, I think I'm at the point where I could do this on my own. But again, I took my 401k money thinking, how big a risk is this? I'll take my 401k money, which at 30 wasn't that much. I knew Ketchum would hire me back if I completely just failed, and thought, I'm going to give it a go. And I always said to myself, I will leave when it stops being fun. For me, that's what drove it, because I'm not going to waste my time doing a bunch of work I don't like doing just so add zeros to my bank account. Just wasn't my philosophy.
Susan, it's great to have you here. Thanks for this great conversation. I want to talk about risk. And, I am aligned. I think we see a lot of accidental entrepreneurs in this journey that sort of are maybe didn't intend to, and they sort of figured it out along the way and grew and scaled. You took a risk. 401k money is real money, even at 30 years old. That's real money. We have a lesson in compounding there. But how does risk factor into your entrepreneurial journey? How do you think about risk and making smart bets?
I think you just put your finger on it. It needs to be a smart bet. So when I started Access, the whole point of the agency was that I believed we were at a point in time where technology was intersecting with the consumer and the business markets. Mm-hmm. But PR agencies didn't understand that. They had their B2B tech agencies in San Jose and they had their consumer agencies in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And if anything had anything to do with GPUs or bits or anything to do with rendering technology, it went to the San Jose folks. And that was terrible because they didn't know how to position a company. They knew how to inform the market, not inspire the market. And I really believe that taking my consumer brand experience to technology, that I was on the cusp of real opportunity. So this was in 1991. And it was before CD-ROMs and smartphones and everything we take for granted. Mm-hmm. So that's why I thought it was a risk, but not a really crazy risk, because I really did do some assessment about the market and what I was going to specialize in that had a real sense of differentiation and a value proposition. I don't think it's a great strategy to say, I'm going to start a business because I don't want to work for somebody else or just because I'm good at it. I really do think you have to, from the very beginning, think like a business person and say, what am I going to offer that's different, that's going to be compelling? And then how am I going to instill that in the business I start so that even if it starts at a small concept, it stays core to the DNA of the business as you grow the business. And that's what I did. And I don't know how much of it was accidental. I had a really strong operating philosophy around this. In fact, when I started Access, I had this phrase saying, we turn bits and bytes into glitz and glamour, which now sounds so silly. But actually, if you had said, who's Access 20 years later? We turn bits and bytes into glitz and glamour. It's the same thing.
Can we revisit something that you said about, you did not, intend to sort of, make decisions to sort of add zeros to your bank account, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to revisit this, that, what I said about the fact that you sold your business right before, was it right before Bear Stearns? It was right before
August 2008, right before the subprime market. Yeah.
Yes, right before that financial meltdown. And what was interesting to me, Susan, that you said that is, then there was a desert of really of acquisitions that were happening, or at least lucrative acquisitions that were happening in our business, right? You were the last before sort of the PE sort of investor started trickling in and we started seeing bigger multiples again. Did it feel weird to you that you sort of became this poster child for like the last big holding company acquisition, honestly, in our business, when it sounds like that's not what you set out to do or be? And again, I go back to the fact that there are so many owners that I have met and known through the years that they have a number, they have a multiple, and they will hold out and until they get that. And that's what they are building for. That's what they're building towards.
I think for some people that works for them. Like that's what is a fuel for their engine. For me, I chose to sell partially because I was concerned about the market and I wanted to make sure that I was making smart decisions for the business. Also, we had major clients, PayPal, Intuit, and they all were saying the same thing. We love you. We'll give you $3 to $4 million a year in fees, which is a significant amount. Mm-hmm. But at one point, we are afraid we might outgrow you based on global needs. And I was beginning to hear that enough that there was a yellow warning sign going on. And I had done all that kind of things that power boutiques do, which is, you get part of an international network and you position it as a curated set of boutique experts, just work better integrated than the multinational marketing firms do. Like I knew all the pitch points on that. But when push came to shove, there'd be a CMO who came in who just knew one playbook. I hire one global agency and they have to be like the IBM of agencies, right? I won't get fired for hiring them. Whereas we didn't have that guarantee for a new CMO. We were still a power boutique. And so I heard enough that I thought I need to get serious about becoming part of an international entity. If I hadn't heard that, if I felt confident that we could continue growing and getting $3, $4, $5 million AORs, then I might not have sold what I sold. But there were enough signals in the market that I felt like this would be a good time to explore opportunities.
So there was, tell me, was there a moment pre-sale, and there are probably a number of moments. So 2 questions. Was there a moment of, I'm not sure I should do this, even with those signals that you had from CMOs telling you that? Was there a moment of doubt because of the gains that you were going to get of a multinational footprint and whatnot didn't equate enough to the loss of not running and controlling your own thing? Was there a moment of doubt when you stepped into it at an emotional level, different than it made good business sense and it was allowing me to serve my clients and the team and whatnot? Was there a moment of doubt in that space, in that moment?
I don't think you can be passionate about your baby that you conceived and you brought up and not just have a moment of doubt, but have an enduring sense of mourning, frankly. I stayed on longer than the earnout. A lot of people wondered why I stayed on so long. And part of it was because I really wanted to continue the culture of Access despite the different inputs that were coming from Omnicom. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to make sure that we kept investing in ourselves as an agency, because once you do get acquired, there's such a focus on the profits and the EBITDA. and such a shift away from the people, which was antithetical to how I thought about running a healthy environment. So I stayed on a long time. And through that whole time, I admitted I made a deal with the devil.
Mm.
But if I flip it on its head and hadn't done that deal and gone into that downturn without, the ability to have Omnicom in our background, would we have kept PayPal? I mean, we hit the highest multiples that have ever happened in the industry. Like, they set multiples for us that they thought we'd never hit. And we did this in the face of a downturn.
Mm.
So I'm not sure what would have happened to Access if we hadn't had this sort of extra big brother behind us. Maybe I'm rationalizing it.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, yeah, I have emotional regrets all the time. But if you don't have emotional regrets, then you sold too late. There's that saying, which is you should sell before you want to sell.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point.
When you say emotional, like, what can you talk a little bit about what those emotional regrets are?
Yeah. For me, I really felt authentically committed to the people at my firm. And it meant that even during our earnout, which for anyone who's explored that as a possible exit strategy, as a owner, you're really motivated to just shave every expense possible during that earnout period so that you can get the multiple on the profits. And so I remember the first time I told Omnicom, we're going to do our retreat, because as an agency, we had multiple offices and we always did a retreat. And once every 3 years, we did a power retreat somewhere really expensive and fabulous. And we were supposed to be going to Las Vegas. And they said, that's insane. Like 100 people going to Las Vegas, and this is all going to come out of your profits. Like, they were trying to explain mathematics to me. And I said, yeah, I know, but here's the other side of that mathematical equation. I don't invest in my people. I don't keep my people. I don't keep my accounts. We both lose. And so my emotional regret has been I was able to protect some aspects of keeping people as a priority over profits, and other aspects, it's just the reality of gravity. When you sell, there are performance expectations. And I don't know the EBITDA expectations of a lot of the people who listen to this program, but we were hitting higher EBITDAs than anyone in our industry. And yet there was still this pressure to add another 2 points to profit every year. And it doesn't make sense. Like, I really do believe there's a point where you start actually consuming yourself. And they didn't see that. So I would say that's a fundamental schism that's caused me pain. That's my regret.
You used the word protect, and I was thinking about that you stayed on a little bit past the earnout. Was it in your mind's eye that you had a role of protecting those behind you that would ultimately take it over once you left? Was protection the word that was in your psyche as you were thinking about that extra time that you stayed?
I think it's two steps. I think the first thing was transition. Like, I think any founder, to have a successful completion, whatever that looks like, should build a really strong team behind them, preferably staffed by people who are even better than them, certainly better at certain skill sets. And then set up the infrastructure so that those people are set up to succeed when there's a transition. Part of that transition also included protection, because I was the person in the power position. My backbench, however excellent they were, they didn't have the negotiation role with the acquirer. Right. So that's where I could actually exert more influence and knowledge to play chicken a few more times and say, we won't do that, because if we do that, then I'm going to do this. Now, you can only do that so many times, but that was all driven by the need to protect things that were really core to our culture.
So building on this conversation about people, one of the things I know that, Susan, you were known for is not giving out an iota of equity, right? Yeah. As you were building Access. How did that play out as you all were growing, as you said, hitting numbers that you didn't, didn't even seem feasible in that era? I know you had one of the highest margins in our industry. How did that play out both before the sale and after the sale? And how did you manage emotions around that?
So I don't believe in giving away equity. Like, I'm going to share a philosophical belief system of mine, which is people earn equity and they buy equity. I bought equity with my investment from my 401k plan, and by taking out a second mortgage, and by putting my house on the loan papers. Those were all my financial risks that I took. Mm-hmm. So I would have been prepared to sell equity, but that also gets problematic. So in terms of managing the discontent that can follow a sale, I was able to say to people, I think this is the best strategy for the business. You will be rewarded. I gave a people sense of what I would be paying them out of my proceeds. They were significant numbers. And because they'd been with Access so long, and because they trusted me, I didn't have to have some weird, complicated, emotionally upsetting equity plan. Mm-hmm. I think equity can work in certain instances. I just think you have to be really smart about your expectations and understanding their expectations once they're an equity partner. And I didn't want to give up the culture center. And I think when people have equity, they start feeling like they can start weighing in on things that I didn't want them to weigh in on.
Hey, Susan, how much of that came from your dad? Or did you just make that discovery of your philosophical belief on your own journey?
I really did it on my own journey. I have to admit, I have a twin brother. He was very successful on Wall Street, very business oriented. And so we frequently had conversations well in advance of any of my business decisions, just generally about macroeconomics. And he would tell you his saddest moment was when he didn't get to invest in my startup, because he's the one who told me, you need to get out there. You're doing so much. He had the funds. He was very successful. Let me be your funder. And I said, no, that would be awkward. And so to this day, if you say his worst missed opportunity, it was not investing in Access. But he was a good, conversationalist, like a partner, business thought partner.
Yeah. So stay there just for a second. So that role, obviously unique role with a sibling. As you think about other owners that you've come across in your journey, talk about thought partner and ally or mentor or wise counselor, whatever you want to call it. So either your reflection on that sounds very positive with your brother, but as you think about other owners that are like, no, it all lives within me and I'll make the right decisions, or I'm going to solicit input. So just give me some feedback or some commentary on hearing outside voices as a lonely owner.
Well, a couple of things. One is, I don't believe that there's anyone who's so talented that they alone can carve the straight path to success and do it with a minimum amount of financial risk and a maximum amount of return, and a return that only they will be able to benefit from. It just doesn't exist. Like, the wheels fall off the trolley on that strategy. I do believe that getting input from people who you trust is really critical. I have to admit, I'm a member of this organization, YPO, Young Presidents Organization. They were very helpful when it came to just discussing the terms of the sale or why I was selling and what was driving it. This group, they have no interest except in supporting you. And so not every founder can have a YPO experience, but put together a mentor.
Build your own.
And it should include someone who's financially savvy, preferably someone who's actually been involved in the professional services industry, and someone who's actually navigated the run up and the downturns of a market, so that they can actually nudge you on thinking about the negatives of different things that you're thinking about the positives too. And they can be your doppelganger on that and your thought partner. I think that's critical. Yeah. I think I would have been a lot less successful without having that group behind me.
Does that ever take the form of a board of directors? I mean, I've seen owners that formalize it with a board, and yours sounds perhaps a little more informal. Do you have pros and cons on that mindset or that vocabulary?
I think for certain people, a board of directors is really good because they like the formal nature of it.
Yeah.
And because discipline sometimes is best exerted from outside in. For me, I'm a Capricorn. I'm highly disciplined.
I love it when the star signs come up.
Yeah. I did not need a formal. I needed something which was much more organic and much more like I could tap when needed versus a formal schedule. But for some people, I think a formal board is a really great idea. And if I were an agency thinking of a build and sell strategy, I would definitely want someone like me on the board to say, okay, these are the things I learned that you can benefit from. And these are the things that I would do differently now, given the market.
I mean, this Bill or me, Susan, you may know, but I'm curious. So if you have a board of directors, so if you formalized it, right, would they have the power to remove you as CEO? Like, I mean, no. So, okay,
only for a public. If you're
only if you're
publicly traded.
Yeah, we're co-opting corporate vocabulary.
Yes, okay,
in reality, they're a board of
Yeah.
advisors at best, and they may get a little bit of cash every now and then.
Yeah. Okay, that makes more sense.
No.
Because I don't know why someone would self-inflict that on themselves. So I want to go back to something that you said earlier as well, Susan, that you may not have sold when you did had you not been getting the market signals that you were getting. Mm-hmm. Is there a world in which conceivably Susan Butenhoff could still be CEO of Access Communications today? And is that something that you would even dream of or that you would even still want in today's environment?
Categorically would not want to do this. I would not want that role for so many different reasons. One is, look, I think that I had good business practices and that helped me succeed, but I also had the benefit of a crystal ball that worked, right? So 91 to 2000, we had one of the biggest run-ups of the tech industry ever, the whole dot-com era. I mean, no agency gets to $10 million in less than 6 years, unless there's macroeconomics going on that's helping you. So it was, the market was exploding. Plus, AOR's agency of records was the way everybody did something. And particularly tech companies who were very inexperienced with marketing to consumer markets and to, outside of channels. They were so used to just channel strategies. So we could get very lucrative relationships that were enduring. Intuit was one of my first clients. Scott Cook was my contact, the founder and CEO. Mm-hmm. I pitched to him. They are still an Access client. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's insane. So that's all this like magical, mystical time that I really benefited from. So now I look at the market. What do I see? I see there are very few AORs, that clients actually tend to treat agencies more like vendors than partners. And part of that is the agency fault, to be clear. We agencies have a tendency to get so caught up with trying to get the next piece of business. Hopefully, if you're a good, smart entrepreneur, that's what you're focused on. But then you take your eye off of servicing your current business. So what happens is every time you keep adding water to the bathtub, it's like springing leaks all over the place. There's not enough like big accounts that are up for review now that allows you to do that. So at that time, we would swing from being a $2 million agency to a $4.5 million agency in less than 2 years. And I didn't think that was unreasonable for a boutique agency. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't, and on the other side with the clients, I think AI is an interesting dynamic right now. I think the pluses are for that grunt work you don't like doing of timesheets and first drafts of press releases. They can be a real time saver and also help your staff focus on more value-added activities than the grunt stuff. Great. The bad news is clients know that. And I actually know someone who's got a very large marketing budget and is very conflicted because one of these AI-driven shops had sent them spec proposals on an annual report, videos, marketing materials, and all they did was scrape it from everything that the company had put out there. And they were good and they were better than their current agency of record. So here's the trick for the AI market, I think, for agencies. Use it, but be aware that all of it is representative of a moment in time. And an agency is most valuable when you're looking around corners for your clients, when you're seeing things they're not seeing, and AI doesn't help you do that. So that's what's interesting about the market, but I think it's going to flesh out a lot of big budgets for agencies because they're going to think, oh, AI can do that.
Yeah, people that are extracting value out of just providing service, sort of, I call it serve and respond versus lead and challenge. That's basically kind of what you're talking about. I think the serve and responders get replaced. Exactly.
They do.
And the agent and the owner, the clients, the CMOs, they got it. They figured it out. They're taking the same courses and watching the same, things online as the rest of us. Yeah,
right.
They're figuring it out.
When an agency gets so focused on the numbers or like shortcuts that they become executional instead of exceptional, then that is the death knell of growth.
Great phrase. Yeah, great phrase. Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. So a young person, entrepreneurially minded, having worked in a big agency, has an entrepreneurial history in their family, comes to you and says, oh, Susan, I want to go do my thing outside the constraints of this big box. What do you tell them today? That was basically you I described. Just
yes. Thank you. I thought it sounded familiar. I would sit down with them and say, let's figure out a roadmap on this. Like, what do you want out of it? What is the market going to allow you to succeed at? What is your point of differentiation? Like, I think the other thing that's different from when I started is this whole idea of a power boutique was completely new. And what I used to sell is, look, you're getting people who've got big agency experience, but you're going to get the hands-on boutique nurturing and attentiveness. Well, now there are power boutiques everywhere. And so for someone to say, I'm going to start my own agency and do my own deal, it's a really cluttered space. Yeah. And so I would really ask them to think long and hard about how they're going to stand out from everybody else who's doing the smile and dial and offering, bargain basement pricing, which I never support, by the way. That's a whole different subject. But this race to the bottom that currently exists is something that people have to be aware of and be prepared to come up with really strong selling points that lift them out of this race to the bottom.
And how do you think young entrepreneurs today should think about exits, right? I mean, the days of selling to one of the big holding groups is long gone. And I mean, PE is much more popular now. Like, how would you have them think about their exit? Or do you think more agencies need to maybe not exit? Like, do we need to have more agencies that grow, a future Edelman, I guess, right? That grow as a privately held company?
I think the days of privately held companies growing to be the next Edelman is really tough because of the things we've discussed.
Yeah.
So in terms of exits or sunsets or whatever, I do think there are different ways people are doing it. Like, I know a design firm where she sold it back to her staff. It's been lucrative. It's been a long-term plan. It was well executed. She had a financial expert put it together, and she's really happy about where she's at right now because it was her values aligned with a financial outcome that really worked well for her. And she gets to see it continue. That might be important for some people. Alternatives are PEs. The challenge with PEs is they are definitely driven by, money first, people last. And so know the deal with the devil. If I were going to go into a PE strategy, I might examine not a full sell, like get strong enough where you can negotiate with them. And then I would negotiate on what percentage you're going to give them. Like, you're doing them a favor. And I would not give them any kind of majority control. So that would be one thing where I would maybe say, we might have puts so that you can, and calls where we can examine. So make it as flexible as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing I might examine. The big agency sale, I'm not even sure I would do that anymore. Mm-hmm. I think big agency sales rarely are they lucrative enough to really compensate for what you lose in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things, Aarti, we've talked about quickly is, Susan, curious your reaction to this. I have seen in the mid to small world, I've seen a 60-something-year-old owner be approached by a 30-something-year-old entrepreneur, and I've been in the middle of two of them. They've found common cause. The 60-year-old is stuck. Their team's not quite ready. They're not ready to exit. The young person wants to lever up and learn. And so they actually were able to do sort of this JV partnership, if you will, so that the 60-something got energized and motivated by the 30-year-old. The 30-year-old learned some business and actually had a foundation and a platform. And so they ultimately then bought it over time. And so it's no different than sort of the legacy team buying it from an owner. But these are situations where the owners don't have that because for any number of reasons. But I've seen that work where a 30-something and a 60-something get together and it kind of energizes the firm off of a platform already built. So
I think that's really clever. Yeah. I think when you get, that's like a kind of alchemy, right? You have their values are aligned.
Yes.
Their skill sets complement each other. I don't think this is just, here's a 30-year-old, here's a 60-year-old.
No.
It works.
It requires a shop. It's dating. It's shopping.
Yes,
dating.
it is.
Yes.
But if you get it right. Now, the other option is something like these mini holding companies. I know you talked to Michael Young.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really an interesting strategy. I think the challenge is scale, that what they're capable of actually investing in are firms that haven't hit north of 5 million. Mm-hmm. And so the question is like, how business savvy are they really? What disciplines have they not only operated themselves, but they've grown their teams with? So let me give you an example. One of the big lessons I had coming out of the dot-com bust was that we are going to have ups and downs to the market. What makes it harder is when my team gets blindsided. Mm. That should never happen again. And so I started State of the Unions, where every quarter we had a clear sharing of what our financials were, what it was going to take to get to bonuses, and everyone at my agency got bonused, and what it was going to take to get double the bonus, and when things were getting tighter, when the market was getting tighter, or there was a challenging client where we said, this is a problem for the agency. These are our options in terms of retiring the client. Mm. These are the implications. You need to train your entire agency. I used to say, I want to train all of you so you could go out and start your own agency. Mm. And that way you get a fundamentally healthy organization.
Amen. Yeah. Courageous. Yeah. You could lose. I can hear, I love that, but I can hear the backside of if I were to recommend that to somebody about the paranoia, small-minded, scarcity complex coming in with that kind of mindset. So beautiful that you think that way.
Yeah. Ask Aarti. I didn't lose any of my senior people.
that's what I was going to add. Susan, and this is why it was so remarkable to me that you were not only like you didn't have to give equity to keep people around. Because a lot of agencies, especially when they're in high growth mode, that's how they do it, right? I've talked to these owners and they'll say, well, they know who they consider to be invaluable and they've given them some sort of equity to stay around. And Susan, as we talked about Michael, right? Like Michael, worked under you and is now building his own thing. So you obviously train them well. Let's go back. Let's circle back to where we started about joy and the fact that you had come to this with an enthusiasm that I really think is unmatched in our industry. I really do. It doesn't feel like a slog when I'm talking to you as it does with some owners. Having said that, what did you give up? Like, what did you give up? What do you look back on and say, you know what? Like there are moments and things that I would do differently if I were building my agency today.
So fundamentally, there are only so many hours in the day. So what I gave up when I was treating Access as my baby is I wasn't home with my babies, right? Mm-hmm. So I think this whole rubbish statement of you can have it all is completely delusional. You can't. You can have more of one thing at the expense of something else. And so I missed a prom. I remember being in China when something serious happened to one of my children. And there are those moments where you just think, what am I doing? Like, I was in a new business pitch in New York when my son got hit by a car.
Oh my gosh.
Now, he would have been hit by the car anyway. I get that.
Yeah.
But this is a moment where you think, where are my values? Like, I'm such a values-driven person. Do I have to re-examine them? And I would say the things I started doing at Access were we way before COVID went to a telecommute program for everyone at the agency. It couldn't be on a Monday or Friday, but part of that was trying to give me one day back during the school week. And we had a very generous holiday vacation plan. It came from growing up in England, but you could get 8 weeks off. Like, if you were there long enough, you wanted to know what I gave up instead of equity? I gave these executives the gift of time with their families.
Precious.
Yeah. So I also think, though, we will miss something in every situation. And the best thing, if I were a founder now and trying to figure out that teeter-totter balance, I would say, be prepared to give all that you can in the first 3 to 5 years. Like, anyone who tries to do it as a lifestyle startup, I just wouldn't invest in you. And so I didn't have children for 5 years after I started the agency. And that was a deliberate strategy because I didn't want to feel hollow when I was at work. I wanted to feel filled when I was at work. And if I felt like there were these pulls on me in other directions, that would compromise what I wanted to get out of the experience and what I could do for the agency. And that's just a reality check. Like, I'm sure there are going to be some female founders out there who think I'm talking rubbish, but that's my input.
Yeah. I mean, I think the landscape and the dynamics are changing so much, right? It also depends on who your partner is and what their availability is. And I think, that can be a big deciding factor. Like, I was talking.
Let me just point out, my husband, once Access was taking off like a rocket, he worked at Charles Schwab. He was the top trader. He actually retired so that we could have a stay-at-home parent. And I do think those are conversations that good partnerships have.
Yeah. Okay, so that wasn't quite as joyful as a closer. So now I'm going to ask you, what brings you outside of our business? What brings you joy today, Susan? What do you look forward to? What excites you?
Okay, part of it's going to be a business answer.
Sure,
part of it's going to be a lifestyle answer. I am a consultant now purely because I learn constantly. Like, I think I'm on the path of lifelong learning, and I get paid for it. Like, this is the greatest deal in the universe. And I get to work with younger people where I feel like I can mentor them and they can mentor me in many ways. It's like a great feedback loop. So what brings me joy? I will be 100 before I stop doing this because I just love it so much. And the flip side to that is I also have a degree of freedom I didn't have when I was building a business so that I can travel and really focus on learning other things that aren't all business related. So I'm very lucky. I count my lucky stars every day.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yes. Here we are, like almost 20 years since I think we had our first meeting in 2027, and you're still at it and doing this with I would not have expected that. I mean, not just because of the trajectory I've seen most owners go on, right? 5 to 7 years, they go quiet and then they kind of, ride off into the sunset. So you're still going strong, Susan. So always a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you. This has been a real pleasure.
Susan, thank you. You're a trendsetter, a leader, and an inspiration for a lot of owners. So thank you for what you've done and what you continue to do. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
Aarti, you just have moments and experiences And I'm fortunate enough that it's one of them is the experience of this podcast with you, but the conversation with Susan and the richness of your relationship. And so you're able to have a great conversation with her and pull out so many unique insights. And I know you really want to talk about this notion of her not doing it today, not building a firm today. So first of all, thank you for the generosity of sharing your great friend with us and having a really rich conversation about that. But I'd love to get your thoughts on this notion of not doing it today. And when she talked about that, how did that land with you? And then what do we do with this idea of not wanting to do it today?
So, I mean, I in full disclosure, it didn't surprise me because I have been lucky to have many lunches with Susan over the last few years in which she has told me, share that point of view. But I do think it's worth, reflecting on how many owners today, right, were raised looking up to the Susans of the world, right? And really use Susan's trajectory as the model as to what they're building towards. And with that in mind, I do think we should pay very close attention to her words here, right? There are too many owners that are probably trying to replicate her model, hoping for that same outcome. And I think we need to, what Susan's actually saying is you need to find another way, right? You need, the business, the climate has changed, the business reality has changed, and what worked for her is just not going to work for owners today. And one thing I'll say is, especially in my past life when I was at the trades, I would get a young owner, new entrepreneur would come to me. They had just left, an Omnicom agency or a Stagwell agency, whatever it might be. And they come to me and they say, you know what, Aarti, I'm going to start my own agency and I'm going to do things differently. And I would get really excited and think, wow, we're going to see, this is where we're going to see the change happen. But then, right, they fall back to what they know. They structure their accounts. They service the way they service their accounts, the way they secure business, the way they frame their capabilities. It ends up looking just like mini Omnicom agencies. And I think if you're listening to what Susan's saying, is she's saying, don't do that. Right? I mean, disrupt that model. That's not going to work in the same way that it used to. So I just think that was worth folks to really kind of pay attention to.
Yeah. And we didn't ask her, but I'm curious, and you and I have talked about this a couple of times, that sort of distinction that I really am quite fond of and being clear about lifestyle versus performance. I think she clearly wanted to build, and it became obvious after win after win after employee and employee that she was building a firm for performance. And I think we're going to see more super niched lifestyle firms if they can do what you said of do something different and truly unique to serve a unique market. And I think people are going to be happy and content. And you're right, those are going to be their role models. But a famous NFL quarterback might be my role model, but I'm not going to be an NFL quarterback. I'm pretty happy for John McEnroe and maybe more tennis related tennis. I'm not going to, he's my role model, but I'm going to hopefully be good enough to play with my wife for a long time. And so I think that we're going to see more of that performance. And she teased out that notion of when she started seeing fewer agency of record relationships and more vendor relationships. And if you're going to build a lifestyle firm, you can build a rich, intimate firm that serves you and your family with a handful of clients. And you may or may not ever get bought. And that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. And I think that built on what she was saying about, what did she give up? And I don't like framing that in terms of like a working mom question, but really in this context, almost a generational one, right? Like, if you're starting your career in PR today, or you're launching your own agency today, what is your end game, right? What are you willing to risk? What's the outcome that you're looking for? As you said, like, it may be securing a decent lifestyle for yourself, for your family, for your employees, even to do great work for clients, without necessarily angling towards a sale or outside investment. So I think that's a great question.
To be honest about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Within the owner, to be honest about that.
Yeah, exactly. And to that point, I think some people have the, they have the advantage of, as Susan did, right, where they have sort of a family legacy of entrepreneurship. She was able to turn to her parents and get some guidance from them. One thing I wanted to ask her, and I forgot to, is, does she want her own children? Do her own children want to follow in her footsteps of entrepreneurship? But I wondered, for folks that maybe don't have that, right? That don't necessarily have a family history of entrepreneurship, where do they seek out that kind of guidance, that kind of clarity? And Bill, I wonder, does that come from folks like you?
I mean, I think it's one place. I think mentorship. I just came from a great dinner last night with 7 agency owners, a little mastermind that we've put together of agency owners, just talking about the stuff of the day. And so there's one guy who's brand new, left a firm and started his firm. And he's like a sponge and absorbing that. But yeah, I think I have some one-on-one relationships with folks that are what I call sort of entrepreneurial curious. And try to tell the truth about what that is. But I think that I'm such a fan of mentorship, and I find so many agency owners, I'm 90% of agency owners are so generous with their time and want to share and want to help and give perspective and just the simplicity of what should be in a P&L and things like that. So yeah, I think if you search for it, you'll find it. And I really encourage owners to go seek out mentorship, seek out other owners to get their unique perspective.
Yeah, indeed. I think mentorship, community, I think creating a community of entrepreneurs at all different stages. I think that's really critical. Well, on the note about community, we will be back again soon with another episode of Icons, in which we'll talk to another agency owner who has, defied the odds and built something that is lasting and sustainable and continues to thrive. Until then, we'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks, everybody.